Welcome, everybody. My name is Frederick Welly. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at UC Berkeley Global. It's a wonderful opportunity to welcome you all here. And I'm going to have the great pleasure to moderate this fascinating panel with my dear colleague, Professor RAICOVITCH.
Hello, my name is JEAN-MICHEL RAICOVITCH. I'm a professor and chair marketing professor at CNAM, and I will be the other moderator with FREDERICK. A few words maybe about CNAM Berkeley partnership. The world is facing many challenges, and all of us know that the solution should be global. So that's why this partnership between a long-lasting institution in Europe and in the world called CNAM, Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers, and UC Berkeley extension is very meaningful for us. We were due to have an exchange program this year. We were due to have our study trip in California this July. Everything is a bit postponed for obvious reasons that all of you guys have in mind. But we launched this panel, this session of discussion, making the link between, let's say, Europe and the States, making the link between academic from Europe and professional from Europe, and the same on the US side. So that's why we are very pleased to have this connection. Today, this is our fifth panel, and today we are back to lockdown in Europe. So it's an experience for us to lead and to conduct this session, this type of session. All of them were linked to pandemic, but also to transformation of our cooperation and so on. So we have an audience usually of about 200 people who are connected online. And 2 days ago, the French Minister of Economy and Finance Minister also said that the French economy should be agile and powerful in order to face COVID. So I guess this topic is very linked to our topic, isn't it, Frédéric?
Absolutely agree. And it's really an interesting situation. We have not come out of the crisis on our end. So the United States, and particularly also California, has been thrown into a dire need for agility and resilience since the crisis started. We have not had a moment really of relief. And it's in some ways, I think, a good thing to what you alluded to. It just forces us to drive change maybe much faster than we actually thought. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for us and a great honor to have 4 global thought leaders on agility, agile organizational management, agile transformation with us today. And we want to thank you all really to be here and take the time to share your expertise with everybody. The agility that we need now in organizations is hard to achieve at times, and it's not because a lot of very known corporations here in our area in the Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area are agile, that all are, and that it's really a system that is adapted across the board. However, what we can see is that agility really increases productivity, in many cases provides a lot of value to the customers, to the corporations. It's something that traditionally works very well in the software realm, but it has spilled over into many different industries. And I think one of the key objectives that we have in our panel today is to figure out and share best practices on how what often happens in small teams that start being agile within a corporation or an organization can be scaled up to the size of an entire organization. How can you actually, as an organization, set yourself up for agility and for success in these very rapidly changing times? So thank you very much for being with us. Again, reminder to the people with us in the audience, please post your questions in the Q&A. And I think we can right away kick off the panel. So to start off, if we want, do you want to lead the introduction, Jean-Michel?
Yeah, but maybe we can have a first round table, and each of the panelists can say a few words about where they stand and their main activity, and then we will jump into the first questions. Pat?
Thank you. I'm Pat Reed, delighted to be here. I have had a background of being an executive at the Walt Disney Company, Walt Disney Pictures and Television, NBC, ABC, an analyst at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Criminal Intelligence, and a diverse background before becoming an international coach, executive coach, and business agility transformation leader at companies like Walmart and eBay, and delighted to be here.
Thank you. Frank?
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon to everyone. Frank Lawrence. So I'm an assistant professor at CNAM, and I've been teaching the management of information systems for the past 12 years or so now. My background is also in business consulting, a strong background in support function like finance, HR, and of course, information system, helping companies transforming themselves into a more efficient way of creating values through the integration and leveraging the technology. Very happy to be here, and let's get this rolling.
Thank you. Edward?
Well, good morning, good afternoon. My name's Edward HIEATT. I've been in Silicon Valley for the past more than 20 years now, initially as a software developer, but over time building up a team of people passionate about Agile, the topic for today, and how to, in particular, help large organizations adopt Agile practices on the software side, team level, and also scaling it. That team has grown to approximately 1,000 people now. We've probably helped thousands of customers over the years. So excited to share my experiences here with this group.
Thank you. And SAM-SAK, this is your line. You might turn your mic on because you're muted. Here you go.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm SAM-SAK. I'm based in Paris, but today I'm luckily on a small island called WEHRLE. I'm practice lead for Continental Europe at KAINOS, a global software and tech services company. I have 20 years of experience in delivering technology and business solutions in various industries, and I'm currently delivering global transformations for finance, HR, and planning functions, leveraging WORKDAY, a cloud-based platform, and happy to be here.
So we have a sound foundation, including technology, skills, and so on. So maybe our first question for each of the panelists will be to share your thought about the topic of today, Agile transformation, and why is it so key for the transformation of the corporations. Who wants to start? Maybe Pat?
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
Critical because of the volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity that's challenging everyone in today's world. It's vital for us to recognize the benefit of Agile ways of thinking and Agile values and principles. And what's particularly important is the Agile leaders, the leadership of organizations, to role model behaviors that will set the team up and create an environment where they can learn. Accelerated learning is the key. Because of the dynamic that we talked about, that VUCA dynamic, it's about learning faster than the market is changing to stay ahead of that. So it's absolutely vital to build your sense-making skills, to augment your planning and predicting skills that have gotten you to where you are in your success today, and to validate your assumptions by running and thinking about thought experiments and thin slice experiments so that you can accelerate that, optimize that, creating value for the ever-changing market. So clarity of purpose is really important, and empirical-based learning that's been validated through real data coming from those experiments, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Maybe we can just do the same round. Like Frank, what do you think? Why is Agile so important for the entire company?
Well, let's put it this way. Agile needs to have some kind of definition here, and maybe one of the best way of defining Agile is to see what Agile brings in terms of efficiency to companies or to institutions, because this is not only business, but this is also each and every single institution. So first of all, Agile is efficient. It needs also and requires to get adapted to a situation. So either being reactive or proactive in terms of delivery. And even more so and foremost, value creation is really, really the driver that leads to implement agile organizations and institutions. So if we get into that definition, it means that anything that brings companies to the creation of more value is a good thing. So now, second thing that I would like to stress out is that Agile is highly driven today by some very specific things like technological enhancements. Anything that is around technology and integrated within organization has proven to be sometimes quite efficient in the way people wanted to use that technology for. So basically, value creation can be leveraged also through technology, but it's not enough. So the next point about being agile and becoming an agile is leverage through the help of tools, like technology is, but will also require additional components and additional integration of other items, like, for example, understanding culture, understanding people, and ensuring that you not only take that technological piece, that facilitator, that accelerator of value creation, but also develop the other aspects of those value added components to get to the end result, that is the value creation. So agility means basically making a recipe where you take all your ingredients and ensure that the way you want to use those ingredients will lead to the creation of value.
Thank you. That's I think actually we had on our question list is what does it mean to be agile? I think you already and Pat gave a very good definition of that. But yeah, along those same lines, Edward, what would you think? Why is it important for the entire company to be agile?
Yeah, well, certainly agree with what's been said so far. I think the way I come at this is that there's really a business imperative to change right now. I mean, you could argue for the last 10 years or so, but what's happened is that thanks to the sort of modern software companies in Silicon Valley, the consumer-facing software companies in Silicon Valley in the last 10 years or so, all of us as consumers are very used to excellent experiences with software, right? On our phones, we all have these amazing applications that may interact with something like Facebook, and maybe isn't onto our primary vendor relationships, but we've come to expect those kind of slick experiences. We have no time for software that is clunky or slow or takes training to use, etc. And we've all become used to the time-saving effects that it can have for us in our lives. So then we turn our attention to our banking software that we use, or our real estate software, our insurance software, etc., our automotive software. Same expectations now are in our minds, right? And so what's happening is that we judge our vendors, our service providers, more and more by the software that they expose to us. We think of them as their software, in fact. And those with better software experiences tend to win, right? Now, this is taken, I wouldn't say by surprise, but maybe by surprise in slow motion, some of our most established organizations, in particular, banks, auto companies, etc. Because, of course, those organizations were not born in the age of software. Some of them were born hundreds of years ago. And software was seen up until fairly recently, perhaps even today, as sort of a bolt-on, right, for those companies, extra part of the business, the online shopping experience versus the in-store shopping experience, the online editorial versus the newspaper, right? And that has sort of slowed the progress business-wise of those companies that are taking on software as core to their business, as the business, more and more are seeing themselves separate from the competition. And of course, the virus has just accelerated all of this. Famously, young people don't go into banks anymore, right? They use their phone to do banking. Well, now everybody doesn't go into banks because of the virus. And so it's very clear that becoming really good at software development is now a business imperative. You could say if you don't, you die, right? Or at least you lose. And so the question is, well, what does that mean for large organizations, medium-sized organizations, right? Really, it means you've got to start getting good at software, consider it part of the business. And then what does that mean? Or what does it mean to be good at software? I think what Pat was getting at is what I would center on, which is, it's about being able to hypothesize on what your customer might want out of software, out of the interaction with your business, right? But then test that it's working in incremental steps. And if it's not, make adjustments. And if it is, double down, right? And then have new creative ideas, innovate through software, see if those things work. Maybe shoot a bit too high and make mistakes, right? But communicate with the user by putting out new software, iterating on what they're finding valuable or not. In other words, those who are going to win must be good at living in that constantly changing world of software requirements, software hypotheses, etc. Those who will lose maybe ignore software or think of software as we're going to build some software and we're going to be finished, right? They will lose business-wise. It's no longer philosophical. And so Agile for me, and becoming good at Agile for me, simply means how does one create an organization that can execute in that environment, right? That's the original definition, really. Being Agile, being able to duck and weave, so to speak, with the requirements being changed. How do you do that? Is the question, but being good at that has to be the answer.
So basically, Agile is a system and organizational structure that works very well in software development because everybody is software nowadays. Those who are Agile will function best. So basically, software a bank is not a bank; it's an app, and maybe
exactly,
a website.
So, and software, of course, is actually very flexible. It's just code on a page, right? In theory, it is not bridges and cars. It is easy to change in some sense. The breakthrough that Agile represented 20 years ago was that actually you can change software quickly in response to changing market needs. It has not got to be brittle. But the question is, how do you get good at doing that?
Thank you very much.
Sorry for interrupting. All of us have different perspective, and Pat was emphasizing the management element. Frank was also business oriented, and Edward, you were definitely the customer experience /IT technology driven. SAM-SAK, what is your perspective on the topic to close the first round of discussion? And then we can react, because Frank, I saw you were willing to react. So then we jump into discussion. SAM-SAK, this is your line.
Thanks. Back to the question, which was the importance of Agile. The importance of Agile is to respond faster and better to a disruptive event or market challenge. It's not always creating value, innovations. It's also to respond to market challenge that can bring you to be more productive and more efficient in your process, in your organizations. And some event that we have here in Europe, but we can see it elsewhere, is the lockdown, thanks to the COVID-19. And during the lockdown, some industry, which are not in the software industry, like in fashion retail, that are bricks and mortar, has to innovate and experience successfully new ways of selling, like remote selling. Some luxury brand has tried successfully remote selling, which is bringing the shops to the consumer place, and it was a real success in luxury. Disruptive events like lockdown pushes restaurant to innovate in the way they have to react and to adapt very quickly in 24 hours in their delivery model, enhancing their capacity to deliver with click and collect, with direct deliveries. So this is Agile too. And we've seen not only organization, but also citizens and workers were remarkably able to adapt and to be more agile because of this pandemic, to adopt remote working and telemedicines, for example. This is also agile for me. And we've seen with this pandemic some good sign of agility in everyone. And this is something we can rely on just to help organizations to be more agile, because there are some tools and tools to do that, and we'll discuss that later on.
Out of the example you take, which is, let's say, the pandemic, we can understand that definitely we need to adapt. It can be competition, it can be evolution of the market and so on, but the transition has to be definitely quicker, and our ability to go online in the education environment and so on is also one example. When preparing the discussion, we also, let's say, took into account that the situation was not exactly the same in different industries, and let's say the ability to react to adapt via an agile approach was not the same if you were a small company, a mid-sized company, or a large company. And maybe you can react on your perspective depending on your experience, maybe at the government level or at the large corporation level, about what does it mean to change and to adapt, depending also on who you are, which kind of industry or what kind of living body you are. Who wants to react? And maybe also you can comment, Frank, if you want to already to react to others.
Yeah, maybe I can react on this one, because the urgency of Agile is very depending a lot of the sector or the industry you are in. If you are in a platform company or in media company, can be disrupted quite easily. So the market challenges are different. If you are in fashion retail, you take care of the quality of your collections, and the challenges are elsewhere, and the time needed to be agile is a bit different. So, and if you are a global leader in utilities or in water or waste management, it's also different. You have a lot of assets, you deliver services with long-term projects, and you are taking more attention to the efficiency, the profitability of your contract, and it's a different perspective on the time and the urgency of being agile.
Who wants to react? To comment? Yeah.
Yeah, just if I can react just to one thing. What we heard so far is, and what I've heard so far is that we talk about reactivity, and we talk about companies, institution being reactive or responding to an event, which is one side of the agile process, the capacity to cope with change. That's absolutely true. What I would add to that, what I would see from experience and from what I've seen in transforming organizations, and even more so back offices organizations, is that you need also to instill into the organization the adequate management, the adequate governance, and the absolute necessity to streamline the decision-making process inside the company. In other words, being agile requires not only the transformation on how you cope with change, but also on how you anticipate the ruling of your own organization and decide on the best ways to structure decision-making processes or reaction capacities within the company. And so, to give you a concrete example, if we take like some companies, because agility means absolutely everything, but at the same time, and I like one comment which I think you said, Edward, it has to be specific. And when we say it has to be specific, it means that we need to consider each and every single case, because not every single company located in each and every single let's say framework, country, etc., will react the same and will understand agility in the same way. So what this means is that usually and typically you get a scope, and within the scope of a company, you just the manager or the leader main job is to make sure that you get the right people at the right place with the right capacities to either answer a situation and meet the change request, or to develop new things. And once you have achieved this, it means that by the time the company is done with, let's say, that project assignment, you already have to renew and think about the consequences of what you're doing. So it's also instilling change as the rule inside the company, but also ensuring that the people who are also conducting the change as well as the rules are able to do so. And that is strongly influenced by some factors, very strong factors like internal politics, regulations, like culture, like the capacity of the different elements. So agility is really specific, and the point here is that it's a never-ending process of rebuilding, unlearning, and restructuring, so that you get to the purpose you want to do, either being reactive and meeting events, external events, and responding to change, or anticipating the next step, that is creating new things that you want to implement, and out of which you want to build to continue expand, continue grow, etc., etc. So that's where agility is very interesting in its concept, because it brings not only some capacity to react and changes the culture in that way, but also develop the capacity of the company to anticipate. And ultimately, we all would like to have businesses who are able to anticipate and meet their customer needs, their employee needs, their whatever needs in the future without having to suffer, but delivering things in the most easy way. Well, it's not always the case, but
it's not always that easy.
It's not always that easy, unfortunately.
But is it that easy to transform a large organization? Just like, I don't know.
It is impossible to transform a large organization. They have to transform themselves, but we can set them up for success. To kind of augment the conversation at hand, I have had great success at helping very large organizations to transform by starting with their cultural mindset, the way they perceive change. We talked a lot about change and uncertainty. Our brains crave certainty. Our brains don't normally, naturally crave chaos. But if we set up organizations to understand that every single individual, if they could change their relationship to change and complexity, to recognize, to see challenge as energizing. So they step in, they like the challenge, they love that challenge. The greater the threat, if you will, or the greater the challenge, they'll step into that challenge and get energized by it, focus on how they're going to take action. The other topic that we haven't really added here yet is agility, especially large-scale transformation, needs to have everyone co-creating new behavior changes and new habits through actionable learnings. It takes an action on everyone's part. We all know how it feels to have change pushed on us, but if we can actually co-create and be a part of that change and pull it, then we get energized by it. So there's that element of being agile and thinking in an agile way with an agile mindset. And to your question, Jean-Michel, I've had great luck with very large companies, helping them to instill that agile mindset in their core culture so that it is their guiding default on how they deal with the kind of challenges that Frank was talking about. whether it's sense making or whether it's proactively creating disruption to the markets or responding to it. In any case, the one thing that helps the organization embrace change and thrive is that agile mindset.
Pat, if I can add to this, sorry, Frederick, and don't hesitate to cut me because I speak a lot sometimes, but I'm passionate about this. If I can add to this, it reminds me of a company called ABB, a Swedish company, where we had a case where decision making to become agile was to be reduced, and they introduced some methodology to improve the way of making decision. It's called the 6 hats methodology, just to name it, and that capacity really brought about straight away some results where we were going from cycle of 3 months on decision making into a few minutes or a few hours, because people were trained to think in a certain way and getting focused on solving issues or on creating other items. So not only being reactive but also being proactive. So what Pat is saying is absolutely critical. If you want the change, if you want to be agile, you have to want it. And this is really the first prerequisite. And you have to want it really at the top level. And it means that if you want it at the top level, you have assessed the consequences of wanting to become agile. And maybe at some point, you need to transfer some of your capacity and decision-making capacity and power from where you are to the closest or to the best fitted into the organization. In an example of creating a software development based on user experience, maybe the people who can decide and the best ones are the ones who are really close to the customer. So they must be involved, they surely have a say, and they must not just be pushed the latest software development like this is the the magic. Just press the button, it's going to work. This is not the case. But if they get involved, and if they decide on their own, that's where I've seen, from experience, the best results. So
these principles that you're describing, basically, do they work across industries? I saw Edward was ready to react earlier. You, Edward, have been able also to consult companies across different industries and sizes of companies. What would be your take on kind of the universality of applying?
I can also add my question, and then we give it to Edward. Edward, part of the discussion is linked to, let's say, change management, to leaders' attitude, to customer experience, and so on. How do we make the link with technology which doesn't have the same tempo? Because on one side, technology is very easy to implement from, let's say, a technical point of view, but definitely there is a link between the fast-changing approach you mentioned and what we were just discussing in terms of culture, in terms of change management, in terms of leadership.
Yeah. So I think what becomes very important here is, just to lead into the answer, is to not consider what we're talking about here to be something that only fast-paced companies can hope to do, or there's only a reason to do it if you're being disrupted, right? It is the case that many of our examples of what we're talking about come from, the Silicon Valley type company. Well, look what they did. They pivoted and they used lean methodology and they, changed their whole business overnight and all of this, and that can be done. But I often get asked, well, if you're a huge bank or a huge auto company, you're not going to be disrupted. You're not going to change your business overnight. So why is this all so relevant? And I think it's a fallacy to say that it's not. Because in reality, I think Pat was mentioning it, there's innovation to be done no matter what industry you're in, right? Things change. Look at the auto industry. Who would imagine 10 years ago what would be happening now? Why is Tesla the most valued company? That's a surprise, right? In banking, it's all gone online, et cetera, et cetera. So there's innovation to be done. There's also just efficiencies to be gained. And in particular, to answer your question, I think what many of us know in our bones is that a lot of larger institutions, a lot of successful institutions, who aren't under pressure of disruption have become slow moving, less innovative, inefficient, expensive to do business internally. And this notion of Agile's held out there as here's the way out. I think to answer your question, Agile is applicable to all companies in all industries. If by Agile we mean solving for innovation, efficiency, less cost of change, being able to react, as you were saying, Frank, be able to react, not that you always have to be reacting. Our military is trained to be ready, although they're always fighting a war, right? And so I think you have to start thinking of Agile as a solution to business need, right? If you think of Agile as the thing to do, you're immediately, as Pat was saying, you're pushing things on people, or Frankie was saying, you should do it this way and it'll all be okay. That doesn't work, right? What does work is to think of what is our business need? What could we do better if we're able to do it? Like, what are the business goals? What are the measurements we want to see move? What innovation do we want to accomplish, right? That changes the conversation, because first of all, it appeals to the business for, success will mean better business results, right? It stakes out definitions of success. It gets the business leaders, everyone in the company excited, right? Let's go and accomplish these things. And in particular, it starts to change the thought process of what can be done, right? We want to move this metric from here to here, or there's a new metric to establish. Let's see if we can get it here, right? Let's see how fast we can get it there. Why can't we get it there in 3 months, right, et cetera? If you have that conversation, right, that's changing the business thinking. That's transforming the thinking. Agile is then intended as a set of practices that solve for that, right, that accomplish that allow for a new cultural way of being that is always pushing the needle, shall we say, on business results, right? I think that's a much more successful way to think of it. And to the extent that Agile hasn't worked, I mean, many of us probably on the call as well have experienced Agile transformations that just don't do anything. Nothing happens. This is not a new conversation for most people in industry. I think what it turns out to be is that we tend to be cautious in change, right? We tend to not think of those business metrics as possible to change, or think of our old business metrics. Or when we're talking about adjusting how we operate, we're afraid of the employee's reaction, right? Oh, we can't do that here. We don't need to do that here. Agile transformations have generally fallen apart because of that, or we're not bold enough as leaders in industry. And I think if we say, actually, Agile is about solving those business needs, and we're on the hook to do that. How do we do that as a software team, as a business team, right? Suddenly the thinking can shift. I would say, to get to your point, really we're talking about a set of disciplines, right, that are proven in academia to work, right? These practices around Agile development, they're not, fancy ideas that might or might not work. They are a set of disciplines that do work if done full out, in a bold way, right? But that takes real change. It really does. It's not just hey, let's change our style of coding a little bit, or let's change our business goals a little bit. It's really about an adjustment to everyone's concept of their job, right? And so to the extent that I've seen Agile transformations work the best, right, it's the ones that really try to do something completely differently and stick to disciplines, and start usually in a small way, as I think was mentioned earlier on, but then stick with that boldness as the thing scales out, right? And focus on those business metrics as the arbiter of success, as opposed to, are we doing Agile, right? That's, I think, how you got to frame it for a company, especially one that's wary of all of this talk of process and Agile, or isn't being disrupted, or doesn't see the immediate need to do anything differently, right? Business metrics, bold change.
It's very interesting, actually, all the feedback that you were giving. It resonates with a few questions that we've gotten also around how to how to manage the impact of that transformation and on the work culture. And actually, basically, what I understood, correct me if I'm wrong, for all of you, is what happens on the employee level basically is where before kind of staying in line, doing your thing was the right thing to do, and you get orders, you march. That's the wrong thing to do in nowadays. and in many industries. It's actually the opposite. Is the stepping out of line, the being proactive even, is the thing to do. And maybe this is even phrased, I can phrase it in a more provocative way. Isn't Agile the name itself like an historical artifact of a situation where companies were facing disruption, and a few companies had employees and people that were very proactive, very observative, and started immediately adapting? But today, we could actually change the name from Agile into proactiveness or activeness as a concept where the core of what I understand all of you are describing is, if you have a company where every employee is focused on being on top of things, on staying current, on being excited about taking what they're doing now to a next level, improving it, staying informed about the environment, that's actually what agility, quote unquote, is today. Is that correct?
Yes, if you don't mind me jumping in, Frederick, that's a great definition of enterprise agility and business agility, where every single person is fully engaged and stepping into the challenges and taking that accountability and responsibility with clarity from the leaders. The leaders have to provide absolute clarity on what success looks like to enable that sort of self-empowerment. But that's the goal. The goal is to get everybody fully engaged, operating with the mindset of getting energized and stepping in to take action, not to sit there and say, oh, it's not my job, or I'm going to wait to be told what to do. So leaders now, and to get to the essence of your question or your comment, Frederick, it's because of the diversity of thinking that you get when you get your entire workforce exchanging and innovating on ideas. You get groupthink, and sometimes it's impossible for one leader to have all the answers to tell people what to do. Instead, the leader now tells people why, what success looks like, with so much clarity, and then they inspire and empower that team to self-organize and let the leader know what they need to actually run those kinds of experiments that Edward was talking about, and to validate and learn very, very rapidly. So that's the essence. It's learning through the diversity of thinking, empowering the whole organization to get engaged and be part of it.
If I could, I think that's exactly right. I would define, I think you could say success looks like that, shall we say. If we succeed, that's what it looks like. Learning culture, employees questioning, innovating, etc. I think, however, how to get there is often confused, right? Because
confusing.
What this can sound like, if you're an engineering manager managing 500 people, say, is, oh, you should stop having any rules and let them do what they want, and otherwise you're a bad manager. Right? And your boss and your CEO is talking about agile and transformation and so on. So very commonly, what I'm sure we've all experienced is at the top of the company or the board of directors, business imperatives, change, transform, software's important, etc. Right? Great. Digital transformation, great. At the very bottom meaning the ICs, the individuals in the trenches doing the work, there's often pent-up frustration because their friends at startups can do all this cool work and they're stuck with old systems and old technologies and old applications and the rest. And they'd love to break out of this box, right? And they hear that kind of message from the CEO. Yeah, I'm going to go and be rebellious and do whatever, right? But of course, that's a recipe for just pure chaos, at least short term. And the middle management is stuck, right, being the bad guys, right? And this is what we often call the frozen middle problem, where the top and the bottom both know what it should look like, but it's only the middle that's got any responsibility, right? So I think that's where this conversation starts to get interesting and where the innovation is really happening right now still in terms of thought leadership around this whole topic, which is, what does it mean for a middle manager to be successful if the goal is innovation and be able to change? And they've still got to deliver software on some schedule, right? They're still on the hook for something. And I think it's a long conversation, but I think the simple way to talk about it is the success criteria for the middle manager, for the individual line of business, the software competency, is no longer about a fixed deliverable, right? It's about business goals at some finer grain level than just increased profits, right? For example, let's move our our system, our insurance intake system A from 5,000 users a month to 10,000 users a month, using these attractive techniques for the workflow to be improved. That's a business goal for the next half a year for this VP, right? That's the goal, not someone's figured out some new software to build, here's a budget and you got 6 months, right? So if you think of it that way, that actually is what the CEO wants. They don't care about the exact requirements, right? And it does give freedom for the individuals to build something that accomplishes results. But the results are well defined as what success means, right? So that's what we've got to move towards. Governance of a team like that looks like business results pushed down a layer as opposed to a fixed deliverable. So you are giving more autonomy to the individual and the sub-team, no doubt. But it's within the constraints of business success, right? Not just whatever they feel like doing. That honestly is where I think most companies struggle the most. To give autonomy at the business level farther down the chain and let people innovate within that business constraint is the new thing, right? And if you don't get that right, either nothing happens or you get chaos, right? And that's why most of us, I think, have experienced nothing happening versus a breakthrough.
Well, and the balance of that, if you don't mind me jumping in, the balance of Edward's point is that accountability to achieve value or to learn. It's safe to fail if you didn't achieve the value you expected, but you learn more by doing it, and then you adapt. But it's that autonomy plus accountability for getting better, learning, and delivering what Frank's been talking about with real value. Not busy work and not outputs, but real, measurable, differentiating, innovative value. Autonomy, mastery, purpose, and then accountability for learning and improving.
True.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, just to complete, fully agree with what has been said so far, and even more so. One point, there has to be also some acceptance. We talked about situations where nothing happened and there was a real issue, but one of the key thing that really leverages the capacity and start changing the culture and the organization is the acceptance. Because when you need to deliver things, like for example, let's put the example of an HR person who works on a payroll department every 2 weeks, every month. That person needs to accomplish her work, the work she's doing, or he or she's doing. So that means that no matter what happens, they are still going to be accountable for the operations. So where is the time left to think critically about your job and start initiating that really culture of change? And honestly, it has to be very pragmatic. I do recall in my teams that we achieved when I implemented agile organizations in HR operations. We started achieve some really great results when we started to say, well, 10% of our time is dedicated to think about what we can do to improve. Think about questions about things which go well and we should capitalize on, and maybe extend, maybe enhance, and things about we don't see or problems we may have within the organization. And the minute we shifted that to acceptance, then IDs popped up. Now the other challenge was to make sure that IDs would be sufficiently trained, sufficiently managed, not trained, but and to foster this, we initiated also some new practices like, for example, developing creativity. So at first, really funny, really interesting feedback from the employees and from the colleagues themselves on how we could foster creativity. It was like a game, but eventually turned out that 6 months, 1 year down the road, we had lean processes. We had the lowest TCO ever. We could process like HR operations in a matter of minutes, and we had still IDs to continue that improvement that was needed. So my gut feeling here, and I just have my experience to do that, and maybe some readings on which I can rely on some other example, is that if you want to change drastically, you need to start really at the lowest level. And you need to start small, because big changes don't work. And we know that because it's a very simple, pragmatic thing on a project. When a project is too big, the changes and the risk, the likelihood of that project failing is much higher than if we break it down into smaller pieces that we can manage and control, and out of the small pieces, then built on strong and solid foundations. So I would say also, to add to what you just said and to your point, it's not only all those factors, but it's also in the way you treat agility and you start building it. If you go there with a plan like you would do for an ERP implementation, the chances are that it's going to go nowhere. But if you start with things where you see you need to improve and then you start building on, then chances are that somehow it's going to develop, consolidate, and maybe have some kind of ripple effect onto the other organizations.
If I can react to your comment, Frank, and maybe then I will give the mic to Edward and to SAM-SAK. Rolling out the ERP is still a topic for the company. And
yes,
all
it
of
is.
us know that organization is key, and that managing is definitely facing a paradox. On one side, you need to be, let's say, to lead the corporation and keep control up to a certain extent. At the same time, you need to delegate. So on one side, you mentioned that you need to be very flexible. On the other side, technology, which is the backbone of many companies, are very, let's say, long to implement, still long, and so on. So my question to Edward and to SAM-SAK is, what is new? What is new that could allow to reconcile fast change with the mindset and the change management approach we were talking about? And what is new in order to gain time and to quickly change the corporation features?
Yeah. What is new today is probably in the world of ERP, we have some cloud platforms that are more flexible, more agile, and I do agree with Edward that technology is always faster to implement than a change in mindset and widespreading agile mindset to the entire organization takes time and needs a mix of good recipe to manage it. But my current work is to implement cloud platform solutions which are covering finance, HR, and planning. And these three areas that seems to be backbone or support function of companies are very key and very linked to Agile because finance, when you renew your finance systems, it's an opportunity to reshape and to give clarity on your business model and share it to a larger audience. Because in previous ERP, the business model and the dashboard were only for top-level management. In current ERP solutions, we can share way more data, way more reporting that are actionable and that can provide good insight, good data, and a good clarity of what is the business model of your organizations.
So cloud is one dimension. What other dimension do we have in order to fast change?
In cloud implementations, ERP, you work on like 10 years ago on processes and organizations. But when you deal with processes, you pay more attention to matrix of approvals. It is where you see in large organizations the blockers in agility. And if you simplify the matrix of approval, you empower some people, you delegate, you give autonomy, like Edward said, to people, and you have to give it with a level of trust to provide some levels to be agile more locally. And by doing this, you can pay attention to the diversity of every country, and there is a topic around that as well, because depending on your cultures, you have to pay attention to the diversity of ways of thinking, and it brings you back to skills and the importance of having HR transformations as a good levers. And when you implement an ERP or an HR solutions, you have the tools to communicate to your employee, to engage way more, and to stimulate their vision of how you deliver your business and how you create values. And by doing this, you have more clarity on how you will drive the skills internally to widespread the change management skills or the digital transformation skills inside your organization. And
Edward, I see, Edward, that you want to react, because the fact is that the good news in Europe that we have a lot of diversity, and whenever you have a pan-European corporation rolling out either an HR or finance or whatever system, it's a major challenge from a change management point of view, from a legal point of view, from a cultural point of view, and so on. So I definitely take your point into account that this diversity is one of our, let's say, unique selling point, but at the same time that it's challenging the reorganization and the reshaping of some of our corporation. Edward, you want to react and maybe give some other examples of how do you trigger this change out of technology?
Yeah, well, I would certainly agree that if it's a single question, what's new? I think cloud is the topic. I think I'd break it down though into at least two subtopics. One is what you talked about, SAM-SAK. I mean, internally, shall we say, right? ERP rollouts, HR systems, Workday, etc. What's happening there is, one, these are more being run as a service by the provider rather than being installed locally and configured to death for years and years, right? That has to be the answer, which means that as an industry, we're moving the expertise of running an HR system into one place, one company that is excellent at it and does it again and again and again and again, and can roll out changes, not even known to the end user company. So that's a fundamental shift, right? Not every company is to be good at running HR software anymore, right? In theory, right? Of course, there's still configuration. Of course, there's still adoption, etc. But even there, right, we're talking about cloud letting you centralize services like identity, right, or security concerns into one API point, right? So I think that's the shift that's happening. It's not happening as fast as many of us would like, right? But today, if we began a company, we would not think of hiring a team to run our HR system internally, right? We would just use Workday and be done. That would be the shift. I think the second bucket, though, is more the external business side of this, right? The fact that hosting your applications in the cloud, running them in the cloud, operating them in the cloud can be outsourced as well, effectively outsourced from the point of view of the actual operation, and also from the point of view of not running your own data center anymore. I mean, that is huge. That's a major change, because externally, again, the cost to get going, the cost to stay running, the cost of changing technologies comes way down because it's being done by other people, being done by a provider, right? So getting off the ground with your external software product is much faster, cheaper, easier, etc. So those are the two effects of cloud. Effectively, much more efficient, much less specialty to be duplicated in-house, much faster time to market. Of course, it also causes disruption because now anybody can go play in these games, right? And how to distinguish who's an enterprise, who's a startup kind of goes away. So that's where you get this sense of urgency on changing and so on coming along. If I could just go back a bit though to the point on the practical nature of how to proceed, Frank, that you were bringing up, and I think it was mentioned earlier on, and it's kind of where I was going as well a minute ago. I think many of us are familiar with the literature on what an agile team could look like, and when I say agile disciplines, probably we all know what I'm referring to. We could go into it, of course, but the question is, how do we go from that to this broader rollout? And I was talking about it being very important for the middle management layer, shall we say, by which I mean line of business management, VP of app dev for line of business 1, 2, 3. How do they organize themselves or proceed here? They've got 50 teams, not one team to handle. And I think what I'd say is it's as important for those people to have a very practical recipe for what we're talking about as it is for the individual software development team, right? It's also as important for the supporting functions. Someone mentioned HR or finance. Like, here's how it looks now, right? To be given that recipe, rather than just, hey, we're going to build software differently. I hope you like it. And if you don't like it, you're behind, right? This comes to a head typically in funding of projects, right? If you're a finance person supporting a line of business and you have your budget for the year, right? And you're used to them saying, I will need 10% more, and there's a negotiation, 5% more. There's your budget. Now, what are you going to build for it? You're going to hire these people. You're going to make these investments. It's all locked down in a financial envelope. Now we begin the year, right? But then suddenly the finance team is suddenly told, oh, that's the old-fashioned way. We're going to just build something. I don't know what it's going to be, really. We're going to hire people if we need to. We're doing some cool Agile stuff now. So don't give me this financial cost problem envelope, right? That sets up immediately friction, right? And that's not going to work. So you've got to have an answer practically for the supporting functions as well as the business. And this is where you get these innovative concepts coming in. Like, what does success mean in the first 6 months, say, of a new project? It's not going to mean lots of profit. It's going to mean lots of learning, as Pat was saying. And that's actually success. So the finance team shouldn't be under the impression that they have some financial goal and that's what success is only in every case. It is in many cases, but not in every case. So how do you define success in the financial world or the HR world or the legal world, right? And more risk is good sometimes. Those are very important things to get practical about and crisp about. Otherwise, what you get is some business leaders, getting it, running their teams in the new way, and being very successful perhaps, but being resisted at every turn by every other supporting function, who now look like detractors and friction points rather than supporters. So this is where you had the word transformation. It affects everybody's job, and it does. But you've got to be practical and build it up gradually, as was mentioned.
And just maybe I see that Francis is getting ready to react, but maybe you could react with this specific one of the questions that we have from the audience in here, to the point that Edward was just making. To do this, what you just explained, like, what are the prereqs? I think a big question mark that many companies have is, how do I know I'm ready to actually start off this? I kind of hear this is kind of what I need to do, but can I kick it off? Am I ready, or do I need something more to get to that level?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think it gets back first to the role of the vision and exactly the goal and the objective we are trying to reach. And first of all, you must have some type of very clear definition. We in technical terms we could call it a roadmap, like knowing exactly where we want to be, not precise measures, but at least we know that 5 years down the road, we are going to deliver the best experience ever for the customer, or we want, for example, if we talk about public administration, we want to have like a lean service with minimum paperwork, less bureaucracy, etc. So you need to set up a goal. That's really the first point. And actually, I mean, I could quote a few companies which have been extremely successful at doing that. Visionaries, but I mean, they had in mind an objective. It didn't mean that they succeeded in each and every single thing, but they had an objective. Then, depending on the objective, you need to break it down into small pieces, because once again, the complexity of transforming, as we see, touches like all functions. It touches each and every single level within an organization. So if you start too big, chances are that the early adopters will become the first leavers of your projects, because they won't see any result. And what you want is adherence to the project. So start small, based on the objective you set, and see and measure the result. And how do we measure the result? Well, if we reach the goal we have fixed and we have determined, then you have a first measure. And this is really, I mean, my best 2 cents advice that I would give to any corporation starting into that journey is really to have a clear vision on exactly what they want to improve, and then really start small and decide on the and carry out, I mean, that plan, but leaving the people involved in delivering the plan the freedom, total freedom and autonomy in deciding, doing under the control and supervision of that long-term goal plan. I cannot hear you, Jean-Michel.
I was muted. Sorry for that. If I can react to your comment, you start small and so on, but do we have time to start small? So I'm willing to have the reaction of the panelists.
Time.
Do we have time when your business is disrupted? Do we have time when the let's say the lockdown is taking place, when your competition is
yes,
fast?
You do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You do have time. Look at what happened in the lockdown for some of the businesses. Which were extremely reluctant, for example, in providing additional services using technology online, etc. They reacted very strongly in a matter of 3 weeks. So they decided, but it was one type of agility, like allocating the resources, allocating the time, allocating the people to achieve that goal, and it was a matter of survival. But first of all, when you want it, you can do it. But then you need to decide on exactly what you want to do.
Pat, do you share this comment? Do we always have time?
I'd like to add a couple things to that to amplify Frank's point and address your question, Jean-Michel. We need to do less. In order to have time, we need to have the clarity that Frank was talking about of what success looks like. And then we need to move the highest risk forward so we can validate and really understand, can we commit to that? And then we need to move the highest value and really bring in the whole thinking of the team to say, what are the 2 or 3 or 6 things that we need to do that are most important to get to that clarity of outcome in a thin slice, minimum marketable feature, to get it out there in front of the customer. Because the essence of the whole conversation that we're having right now is, are we doing the right thing? Is it the right product for the market? And if it's not, we want to get that thin slice out there, that minimum marketable feature, to validate our assumptions about it. But we have to cut out, we can't go to the 200 requirements and turn them into 200 stories and then start small. We have to actually start small, but use a forcing function to get right to the heart of what's the highest value creators.
And it's interesting because I think Pat mentioned before that learning is really the currency of success. I think that's best illustrated with an example like Pat was getting at there, which is, it could be that we think a great idea is to build such and such, right? And a team goes and builds it and finds out that the users don't use it and hate it, right?
Right.
And then we kill the project. That's a major victory, a huge business success for us. And we should applaud them in our next company meeting, right? But what they did was throw away a bunch of software they made, right? So how do we make that culturally valuable, right? So that learning is valuable, not finishing some code is valuable, right? And that's where the kind of cultural shifts happen. If you go to Twitter or Facebook or Google or whatever, right, they applaud those kinds of things. They don't applaud you put lots of hours in and finished your coding challenge, right? They want the business success. So I think it can look exotic, right? And how do you reward those kind of things when everyone's bonus plans are built in a different way? That's why the middle management needs new rules of success.
I would agree, but let's not get confused between initiative and innovation, because there is a slight gap between those two terms. And taking initiatives is what encourages and fosters really the development of ideas and creation of ideas. But the other side of that is that the ideas somehow must be valuable to the firm, because eventually the firm still needs to draw the line and assess the cost and still has a P&L to manage. So yes, of course, I mean, you need to encourage creativity, you need to encourage and foster the development of ideas, and ID really is a key thing. But eventually it has to be within that scope, within that range, you know. Management 101. When you manage a team, when you manage a people, you give a scope and then you just let them act freely into the scope. And you say, well, this is your responsibility, do it. But there is no way that we can just let, I mean, people play around with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. I mean, I think, again, like some of these examples can sound like we're talking about the VC-funded Silicon Valley startup, right? But take a situation that's the other side of it. I mean, for example, an IT department that needs to do an integration with some existing, between two legacy systems or something like that, right? The least startup, the least ideated, innovative situation you might imagine. Well, traditionally, what that might look like is we've figured out the architecture, figured out the requirements, we're going to go build that, we're done, right? If instead it's, well, let's actually go interview the users on the other side of this. Let's build the first integration point and make sure it actually functions for them, performance-wise, usability-wise, experience-wise, and then gradually build, right? And if it isn't working, throw that away and start over. I think the same concept can be valuable to consider, right? Even though it's not about, you know, new business idea, throw it away. It is a mindset shift. It is a mindset shift.
Agree, it's a mindset shift, but you must. Sorry, I'm just finishing up on that. You need to accept that. Wasting is an option as well. That failing is an option as well. And what do you say, besides the fact that we need to throw away, we need to, maybe what you can learn from that is really what has worked and what has not worked, because not everything is 100% failure. I don't know of any situation of that, but at least take the lesson, draw the lesson, and re-inject that. And I think this is what's missing into the circle here, because usually when I tell my students, it's like the Deming's wheel. It's a never-ending story. Plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act. And as soon as you have acted, then you restart planning and you restart doing. So you need to instill whatever the initiative, whatever the project, you need to instill that continuous change, fostering creativity and ideas. And this is how you get, I mean, most of the time, the result.
We are planning, we are due to stop on time and get the time at the same time, isn't it, Frederick?
Yeah, I wanted to just actually ask maybe for a closing comment on one of the questions that is actually quite interesting. I think everybody agrees that like the agility is an interesting concept and going forward, but there's actually a looming reality of it, which has to do with the ethics of implementations of change management in any form or shape. I mean, change management is not a new thing, and changing to agility has the same kind of problems with it, is that there is just indeed resistance, and resistance oftentimes because people have been conditioned to work in a non-agile system to specifically not be, and now companies are changing to do the opposite, things that they were told not to do or were not necessarily good. It's kind of this, now you step out of line before you had to step into line, otherwise you will be punished. And so this transformation and that resistance that comes with it bears a big question mark about the ethics of it. Is what is actually the success of an agile transformation? We have seen here in the US, for example, like incredible amounts of layoffs, probably targeted to people and organizations where change had to happen. There was a lot of problems, massive layoffs, massive rehirings as well. But it seems that there has been kind of just an implementation that disruption that changed the workforce and had massive ethical implications. So it would be very interesting maybe to get from each one of you a kind of a closing perspective on the reality of the change management and the potential ethical implications that you see and how that could be managed best.
I'd like to jump into that one, Frederick, and lead with some core Agile values of transparency, honest transparency and clarity of why. Unfortunately, there might be layoffs, but that transparency needs to not be attributed because we're doing Agile. That transparency needs to really be meaningful and thought through to the impact. Another core value is empathy, involving everyone in that awareness and possibly having options for the layoffs to give the co-created, if you will, in terms of allowing people to choose to get laid off and get a package, right? To have that level of transparency, because otherwise Agile gets a very bad name. Oh, we're going Agile, I'm going to lose my job. And that instills fear, which actually prevents Agile from being successful because it's a learning system. So.
Thank you. Who else wants to go? Frank?
Oh, yeah. Well, what I would like to say about this is pretty straightforward. Usually, I mean, this is a short-term view and short-term calculations. Because I mean, when you change and transform an organization, you go from one status to another, to put it simple. But once you reach your goals, it means that you have created new things and you have transformed some of the things, including the human resources that support that transformation, which means that what the company is about or should be doing, and what I haven't seen most often, to be honest with you, but that's only my experience, is that you take the skills and you think about the potential shift in the skills that you would need to support that transformation and make it the most efficient possible. And most of the time, we think about, or I mean, some companies think about transforming equals reducing the cost, but it's not really the objective. Once again, we're out of the objective or out of the goal that transformation is supposed to do. And at the same time, you still need people and you still need things, but in a different way. So we talk about set of skills that you need to develop. And that company, most of the time, totally forget about this. Maybe because I'm European, I'm more sensitive to the fact that I mean we need to leverage on those capacities. But truly, I almost never seen a transformation. And when we talk about transformation, we talk about reshaping, transforming entirely. I've never seen any situation where I had an assessment of the current skills versus the target skills and try to put some, let's say, roadmap in between on how we can achieve to get those skills to support us, which in turn will generate new skills that we don't have in the organization.
Thank you. SAM-SAK, Edward, what do you think about the ethics question around the change?
Conclusion and ethic.
Yeah. What I see in large change, I see that some company has, I do agree, some short-term vision, and sometimes we can see some layoff, and outsourcing some functions can be an easy way to transform. And we see that on the market, but I'm positive because we've seen how people are reacting to COVID. People are able to manage some change, and rotating skills seems to be difficult if we think at large scale. But today's technology helps a lot to widespread learnings, e-learnings. We have a lot of collaborative tools that helps to deliver that rotations from current skills to more usual soft skills and agile skills.
So education might be one, let's say, support function in order to lead the transformation. We are running out of time. Edward, what is your conclusion now?
I'll try and be very brief, Jean-Michel. I suppose my conclusion, my main takeaway is, my sense is that as an industry, on this topic, we're simply not being bold enough in general. We tend to be hesitant. We tend to just sit back because it feels risky any given day to make bold changes. But I think long term, it's, usual story, it's far more detrimental to make no change. And you end up having the change happen to you as a company, right? So whether that's cloud adoption or business competitive threats, take you over. If you don't make your own future, you're gonna have the future happen to you. So I would say, make aggressive efforts on this front rather than sitting back and hoping that it works by itself. On this topic of layoffs and so on, change causes change, right, in people's jobs. I think, however, that as an industry, we're so conditioned to think of change in IT being about cost efficiency, and therefore people, get automated away, that while there is some of that, especially with moving to cloud, we forget that this topic really isn't about saving money. It's about doing better business-wise, making more money. In fact, increasing the revenue, the top line, versus just reducing the cost. And I talk to many business leaders who are excited about all of this, and then they say, so how much cheaper is it going to make me? And I said, well, I'm not sure it'll make you that much cheaper in terms of the people cost overall. It'll hopefully increase your business opportunities, though. So I think I agree with what Frank said. I think I don't know that you need always fewer people. I think you need different applications of those people. I think you've got to be clear with them what the new roles look like, give them a path to be successful in those new roles, and don't just let people try and figure it out by themselves. And I don't see a shift in terms of there being fewer and fewer jobs, for example. I think it's just different jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that concludes our panel
session, isn't it?
Yes, I think on our side, well, thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions. It was a fascinating panel. I think we could have gone on for much longer even, but I'm so glad that we were able to answer a few of the questions from the public. It was very exciting to get your very rare and really insights from experts that have lived this so many times over and still working in this field. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll leave the concluding words to you, Jean-Michel.
Thank you. I do appreciate this type of event because it's really a kind of a learning process, because we are trying to reconcile different points of view. We are trying to make the links between different perspectives on the US side and also on the European side. So the beauty of what we are doing, we are teachers. Some of you are teachers, some of us are teachers in this panel, is that it's a learning process and a transmission process. I took a lot of notes during this session, and it's my learning process. So now my pleasant duty is to use part of our discussion and to transmit to the students and to the audience we are having. Our next session will take place in December. It should be announced soon. We are working on the agenda with the team. Please fill up the survey. We do have videos from the previous panel, and we will broadcast them throughout CNAM and certainly Berkeley extension communication features. Once again, a warm thank, as mentioned by Frank, to the support team and also wonderful panelists we were having today. Our job was very easy because you were jumping to discussion from one side of the screen to the other. Thank you to the panelists and a warm thank you to the audience because it's our duty and our job to broadcast. So we don't see the audience, but we do value you being there. So hope to see you soon in December. In the meantime, stay home, stay safe, use your mask, protect your job, your family, and your community. And we will be very pleased to see you back in December. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Take care.